Sarah Martinez had dreamed of becoming an emergency medical technician since she was 12 years old. Growing up in a small town where everyone knew everyone, she watched the local EMT team save her grandfather's life during a heart attack. That moment changed everything for her. She spent years preparing, studying, and training for this career. When she finally graduated from the EMT program at 22, she was ready to save lives and make a difference. The Metropolitan Emergency Services headquarters stood like a fortress in the heart of downtown. Sarah walked through the glass doors on her first day, wearing her crisp new uniform and carrying a backpack filled with medical supplies she had bought with her own money. She had studied every protocol, memorized every procedure, and practiced every technique until they became second nature. Her instructors had praised her quick thinking and steady hands during training scenarios. Captain Robert Hayes looked up from his coffee as Sarah approached the assignment desk. He was a 20-year veteran with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too much. Around him sat several other EMTs, their uniforms wrinkled from long shifts, their faces showing the wear of dealing with the city's endless emergencies. They looked at Sarah with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Fresh-faced rookies came and went, but the job had a way of breaking people who weren't ready for its harsh realities. "Martinez, right?" Captain Hayes asked, not bothering to hide his lack of enthusiasm. "First day on the job. Let me guess, you want to start in the suburbs where you can handle nice, clean medical calls and maybe deliver a baby or two." Sarah straightened her shoulders and looked him directly in the eye. "Actually, Captain, I want to go wherever I'm needed most. I didn't become an EMT to take the easy assignments." The room fell silent. The other EMTs exchanged glances, some smirking at what they saw as naive bravado. Captain Hayes leaned back in his chair and studied her for a long moment. He had been hoping to discourage her quickly and send her somewhere safe where she could learn the ropes slowly. But her response sparked an idea that wasn't entirely kind. "You know what, Martinez? I like your attitude. There's actually a perfect assignment for someone with your enthusiasm." He pulled out a district map and pointed to a red-marked area on the east side of the city. "District 12. We call it the Dead Zone. It's where we send our most experienced teams because the calls there are like nothing you've seen in training." District 12 was notorious throughout the entire city. It was a 15-square-block area that had been abandoned by most city services except for emergency response. The buildings were crumbling, the streets were dangerous, and the residents were dealing with problems that textbooks couldn't adequately describe. Drug overdoses were common, violence was frequent, and the living conditions were so poor that medical emergencies happened daily. Most rookie EMTs weren't assigned there until they had at least 2 years of experience in safer districts. "The thing is," Captain Hayes continued with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes, "my regular team for that district is out with injuries. Got hurt pretty bad on their last call there, so I need someone to cover their route for the next month. You interested?" Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, but she kept her expression steady. She could sense that this was some kind of test, though she wasn't sure if it was meant to help her or break her. The other EMTs in the room were watching her carefully, waiting to see if she would back down from her bold words. Some looked genuinely concerned for her safety, while others seemed to be enjoying the show. "I'll take it," Sarah said without hesitation. "When do I start?" Captain Hayes's eyebrows raised slightly. He had expected her to ask questions or request a different assignment once she learned about District 12's reputation. Instead, she was accepting the challenge with the same confidence she had shown when she walked in the door. "You'll be partnered with Danny Coleman. He's been working District 12 for 3 years, longer than anyone else has lasted there. If anyone can keep you alive long enough to learn something, it's him." Hayes turned to a man sitting in the corner who looked up from his newspaper with obvious annoyance. Danny was 38 years old and had been an EMT for 15 years. He had specifically requested to work District 12 because he felt like the people there deserved the same quality medical care as everyone else in the city. He was known for his skill and his dedication, but also for his short temper when dealing with people he considered unprepared or careless. The last thing he wanted was to babysit a rookie in the most dangerous district in the city. "Captain, you can't be serious. I work alone for a reason. I don't have time to train someone who's going to panic at the first sight of blood or run away when things get difficult." Danny's voice carried years of frustration with partners who couldn't handle the intensity of their assigned district. "Danny, meet Sarah Martinez. Sarah, this is Danny Coleman. You two start tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Danny will show you the routes, explain the protocols specific to District 12, and hopefully keep you both alive while you figure out if you're cut out for this work." Sarah extended her hand to Danny, who reluctantly shook it. His grip was firm and calloused, and she could see the skepticism in his eyes. He had worked with other rookies before, and most of them either requested transfers within a week or quit the profession entirely after experiencing District 12. "Listen, kid," Danny said as he gathered his equipment. "District 12 isn't like anything you learned in school. The people there have problems that go way beyond simple medical emergencies. Poverty, addiction, violence, mental illness, it all gets mixed together until you can't tell where one problem ends and another begins. If you're not ready for that reality, you should ask for a different assignment right now." Sarah looked around the room at all the experienced EMTs watching her. She could see the doubt in their faces, the assumption that she would crumble under pressure. Some of them were probably taking bets on how long she would last. The smart thing to do would be to request a different district, somewhere she could build her confidence and gain experience gradually. But something inside her refused to back down from the challenge. "I appreciate the warning, Danny, but I'm not changing my mind. I'll see you tomorrow morning at 6. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment reviewing her medical textbooks and emergency protocols. She called her mother, who lived 3 hours away in their hometown, and explained her assignment without mentioning the district's dangerous reputation. Her mother was proud and excited, telling everyone in their small town that Sarah was already getting important assignments on her first week as an EMT. Sarah didn't sleep well that night. She kept thinking about Captain Hayes's smile when he assigned her to District 12 and Danny's warning about the realities she would face. She wondered if she was making a mistake, if her confidence was actually just naive arrogance that would get her into trouble. But every time she considered asking for a different assignment, she thought about her grandfather and the EMT who had saved his life. That person hadn't backed down from a difficult situation, and neither would she. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the station 40 minutes early. She double-checked all her equipment, reviewed her protocols one more time, and tried to calm her nerves with deep breathing exercises she had learned during training. Danny arrived exactly on time, carrying 2 large travel mugs of coffee and a grim expression. "Okay, rookie. Here's your first lesson about District 12. Always bring extra coffee, because you're going to be awake for longer than you think." He handed her one of the mugs and headed toward the ambulance. "And here's your second lesson. Never assume anything about a call until you see it with your own eyes. The dispatchers do their best, but the information they get is usually incomplete or wrong." As they drove toward District 12 in the early morning light, Danny explained the geography of their assigned area. The district was bounded by an industrial zone on one side and a river on the other, effectively isolating it from the rest of the city. Most of the buildings were old apartment complexes or abandoned warehouses, many of them without reliable electricity or running water. The streets had more potholes than pavement, and several blocks were essentially no-man's lands where even police officers rarely went alone. "The people here aren't bad people," Danny explained as they turned onto the main street that ran through the center of the district. "They're just dealing with problems that most people can't imagine. Unemployment, addiction, mental illness, domestic violence, all of it gets concentrated here because this is where people end up when they have nowhere else to go. Sarah looked out the window at the run-down buildings and empty lots filled with debris. She saw a few people walking the streets despite the early hour, some of them clearly struggling with addiction or mental health issues. Children were playing in a parking lot where broken glass sparkled in the morning sun. It was unlike anything she had experienced growing up in her small, safe hometown. Their first call came in before they had even finished their tour of the district. A woman had fallen down a flight of stairs in one of the older apartment buildings, and she was conscious but unable to walk. It seemed like a straightforward call, exactly the kind of thing Sarah had practiced dozens of times during training. But when they arrived at the building, Sarah realized that nothing about District 12 was going to be straightforward. The apartment building had no working elevator, the stairwell was dark because half the light bulbs were broken, and the steps were covered with debris that made carrying a stretcher extremely difficult. The woman who had fallen was lying on a landing between floors, surrounded by family members who were crying and arguing about whether they should have called for help at all. "Ma'am, I'm Danny and this is Sarah. We're EMTs here to help you. Can you tell me your name and what happened?" Danny's voice was calm and professional as he knelt beside the injured woman. Sarah immediately began assessing the woman's condition, checking for obvious injuries and taking her vital signs exactly as she had been trained to do. The woman, who said her name was Maria, explained that she had been carrying laundry up the stairs when she tripped on a loose board and fell backward. Her left ankle was clearly broken, and she was experiencing significant pain in her back and ribs. But as Sarah and Danny worked to stabilize her for transport, they discovered that her injuries were complicated by malnutrition and untreated diabetes. What should have been a simple broken ankle became a complex medical situation that required careful handling and immediate hospital care. Getting Maria down the narrow, debris-filled stairwell was like navigating an obstacle course while carrying precious cargo. Sarah found herself wedged against walls, struggling to maintain her grip on the stretcher while Danny guided them down step by step. By the time they reached the ambulance, both EMTs were sweating despite the cool morning air. "Not bad for your first call," Danny said as they drove toward the hospital. "But that was actually one of the easy ones. Wait until we get called to a shooting scene or a drug overdose where the friends are still high and don't want us to help." Sarah was monitoring Maria's condition during the transport when she realized that this work was exactly what she had dreamed of doing. Despite the difficult conditions and the complex circumstances, she was able to help someone who needed medical care. Maria squeezed her hand and thanked her repeatedly, and Sarah felt a satisfaction that she had never experienced during training scenarios. The rest of their shift brought 5 more calls, each one presenting unique challenges that weren't covered in any textbook. They treated a man who had been stabbed during a robbery but was afraid to go to the hospital because he didn't have insurance. They responded to a child who was having an asthma attack in an apartment where mold and cigarette smoke made the air barely breathable. They helped an elderly woman who had been without her heart medication for 3 weeks because she couldn't afford to refill her prescription. By the end of the day, Sarah was exhausted but exhilarated. She had successfully handled every situation they encountered, working alongside Danny to provide medical care under conditions that would have overwhelmed many more experienced EMTs. As they cleaned and restocked their ambulance back at the station, she felt like she had found her calling. Captain Hayes was waiting for them when they returned. He looked surprised to see Sarah walking normally instead of being carried in on a stretcher herself. Several other EMTs gathered around to hear about their shift, expecting stories of rookie mistakes and near disasters. "How did the kid do?" Captain Hayes asked Danny, his tone suggesting he expected to hear that Sarah had proven herself unprepared for District 12. Danny looked at Sarah for a moment before answering. She kept up, didn't panic, didn't complain, and followed protocols even when things got complicated. But it's only been 1 day, Captain. Let's see how she handles a week before we start giving out any awards." That night, Sarah called her mother again to share stories from her first day. She described helping Maria and the other patients they had treated, focusing on the positive aspects of the work rather than the difficult conditions they had worked in. As she talked about her experiences, she realized that being assigned to District 12 might not have been a punishment or a test designed to make her fail. It might actually have been an opportunity to make a real difference in people's lives. But Sarah had no way of knowing that her real test was still coming. The next few weeks would bring challenges that would push her skills, her courage, and her determination to their absolute limits. The question wasn't whether she could handle 1 day in District 12. The question was whether she could survive what was coming next and emerge as the EMT she had always dreamed of becoming. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah's first day in District 12, and she was beginning to find her rhythm. Each shift brought new challenges, but she was learning to adapt to the unique demands of working in the city's most neglected area. Danny had grudgingly admitted that she was tougher than he had expected, though he still watched her carefully during difficult calls. The other EMTs at the station had started to take notice too, some offering words of encouragement, while others seemed disappointed that she hadn't already quit. Captain Hayes continued to assign them to District 12 every day, and Sarah suspected he was waiting for her to reach her breaking point. She had handled drug overdoses, violent domestic disputes, and medical emergencies in buildings that barely met basic safety standards. But nothing had truly shaken her confidence or made her question her decision to stay in District 12. That changed on a Thursday night in November when the temperature dropped below freezing and the city's problems seemed to concentrate themselves into one horrific evening. The first call came in at 8:47 p.m. while Sarah and Danny were restocking their supplies at a corner store that stayed open late to serve District 12's residents. The dispatch was for a possible overdose at the Riverside Apartments, a 5-story building that housed some of the district's most vulnerable residents. Sarah and Danny knew the building well. They had responded to calls there at least twice a week since Sarah started working the district. Unit 12. Be advised we have multiple calls coming in from that location. Reports of several people down, unknown substances involved. Police are en route, but ETA is 15 minutes. The dispatcher's voice crackled through their radio as they climbed into the ambulance. Danny frowned as he started the engine. Multiple people down usually means bad drugs or a poisoning situation. Could be anything from contaminated heroin to homemade alcohol. We'll need to be extra careful about scene safety until the police arrive. As they pulled up to the Riverside Apartments, Sarah could see that something was seriously wrong. People were stumbling out of the building, some supporting others who appeared to be unconscious or barely responsive. In the parking lot, she counted at least 6 people lying on the ground while friends and family members stood around them, shouting for help. The scene looked like a disaster zone. This is Unit 12 on scene. We have what appears to be a mass casualty incident. Request additional units and supervisor response immediately, Danny radioed as they began gathering their equipment. And where's that police backup? Sarah felt her heart rate spike as she surveyed the chaos in front of them. During training, she had practiced mass casualty scenarios, but those had been controlled exercises with actors playing victims. This was real, and the people lying unconscious in the freezing parking lot could die if they didn't receive immediate medical attention. "Okay, rookie, this is where we find out what you're really made of," Danny said as he handed her the trauma bag. "We've got more patients than we can handle, no police backup yet, and we don't know what caused this. We need to do triage fast and start treating the most critical patients first." The first person they reached was a teenage girl who was unconscious and barely breathing. Her lips had a blue tint that indicated severe oxygen deprivation, and her pulse was weak and irregular. Sarah immediately began assisting her breathing with a bag mask, while Danny assessed her condition and started an IV line to administer medication that could reverse a potential overdose. "Sarah, I need you to stay with her and keep her breathing while I check the other victims. Can you handle that?" Danny's voice was calm but urgent as he prepared to move to the next patient. "I've got her," Sarah replied, focusing all her attention on maintaining the girl's airway and breathing rate. She had practiced this exact scenario dozens of times. But the weight of knowing that a real person's life depended on her skills made every decision feel monumentally important. As Danny moved between the other victims, Sarah could hear him calling out their conditions. Male, approximately 30, conscious but disoriented, probable overdose. Female, mid-20s, unconscious, weak pulse, possible respiratory depression. Male, teenager, conscious and talking, appears stable. The sound of sirens filled the air as additional ambulances began arriving, but Sarah kept her focus on the girl she was treating. After several minutes of assisted breathing and medication, the girl's color began to improve and her breathing became stronger. Her eyes fluttered open and she looked around in confusion, not understanding where she was or what had happened. "You're okay, honey? My name is Sarah, and I'm an EMT. You had some trouble breathing, but you're getting better now. We're going to take you to the hospital to make sure you're completely safe," Sarah said in a calm, reassuring voice while continuing to monitor the girl's vital signs. Before the girl could respond, shouts erupted from the apartment building behind them. Sarah looked up to see thick black smoke pouring from several windows on the third floor, and orange flames were beginning to flicker behind broken glass. The building was on fire, and according to the residents gathered in the parking lot, there were still people trapped inside. "Unit 12, we now have a structure fire with possible trapped occupants. Fire department ETA is 8 minutes, the dispatcher announced over their radio. Danny came running over to Sarah's position, his face grim with the realization that their already overwhelming situation had just become potentially deadly. "Sarah, we've got people unconscious from whatever they took, and now we've got a fire that could spread to the whole building. The fire department is on the way, but people might die before they get here." Sarah looked at the building, then at the girl she was treating who was now conscious but still needed medical attention, then at the other victims scattered around the parking lot. Every instinct told her to focus on the patients she could see and let the fire department handle the rescue operations. But she could hear voices calling for help from inside the building, and she knew that those people might not survive until professional firefighters arrived. "Danny, take over with this patient. I'm going to see if I can help anyone get out of the building before the fire spreads." "Are you insane? You're not a firefighter, Sarah. You don't have the training or equipment for that kind of rescue. You'll just become another victim." Sarah looked at her partner, then at the building where smoke was getting thicker by the minute. She thought about all the people who had doubted her ability to handle District 12, all the colleagues who expected her to fail when faced with real danger. This was the moment that would define whether she was truly cut out for this work or whether she would crumble under pressure like so many people predicted. Someone has to try. Those people upstairs don't have 8 minutes to wait for the fire department. Before Danny could stop her, Sarah grabbed a portable oxygen tank and ran toward the apartment building. The front entrance was filled with smoke, but she could still navigate the hallway by staying low and following the wall. She called out as she moved, listening for responses from people who might be trapped or unable to evacuate on their own. On the second floor, she found an elderly man who had collapsed in the hallway while trying to escape. He was conscious, but struggling to breathe due to smoke inhalation. Sarah helped him to his feet and guided him toward the stairs, sharing oxygen from her portable tank to keep him stable during their descent. "Are there other people upstairs who need help?" she asked as they reached the ground floor. "Third floor," the man gasped between breaths. "Mrs. Peterson in 3B. She's in a wheelchair and her daughter isn't home. She can't get down the stairs by herself." Sarah looked toward the stairwell leading to the third floor, where the smoke was getting denser, and she could feel heat from the fire that was spreading through that level of the building. Going up there would be extremely dangerous, and she had no way to communicate with Danny or the other EMTs outside. If something went wrong, no one would know where to find her. But she thought about Mrs. Peterson, trapped in her apartment while fire and smoke filled the hallway outside her door. She thought about all the patients she had treated in District 12 over the past 3 weeks. People who had been written off by society but who deserved the same chance at survival as anyone else. Sarah tied a wet towel around her face and began climbing toward the 3rd floor. The heat increased with every step, and the smoke was so thick that she could barely see a foot in front of her. She stayed close to the wall and counted doorways until she found apartment 3B. The door was unlocked, and when she pushed it open, she found Mrs. Peterson sitting in her wheelchair next to the window, clearly terrified but unable to escape on her own. "Mrs. Peterson, I'm Sarah, an EMT. I'm here to help you get out of the building," she called out as she entered the smoke-filled apartment. "I can't leave my wheelchair," Mrs. Peterson replied, her voice weak from inhaling smoke. "I can't walk, and it won't fit down the stairs." Sarah assessed the situation quickly. Mrs. Peterson was a small woman, probably weighing less than 120 pounds. The wheelchair wouldn't fit down the narrow stairwell, but Sarah might be able to carry her if she could find a way to safely navigate the smoke-filled stairs while supporting another person's weight. "Mrs. Peterson, I need you to trust me. I'm going to carry you down the stairs, but you'll have to hold onto my neck and help support yourself as much as possible. Can you do that?" The older woman nodded, and Sarah carefully lifted her from the wheelchair. Mrs. Peterson wrapped her arms around Sarah's neck while Sarah supported her weight and began the dangerous descent through the smoke-filled stairwell. Each step required careful placement to avoid debris and maintain balance while carrying another person. The smoke was so thick that Sarah had to feel her way down each step, and the heat from the fire was becoming almost unbearable. Halfway down to the 2nd floor, Sarah's foot slipped on something wet on the stairs, and she nearly fell, almost dropping Mrs. Peterson in the process. For a moment, she thought they were both going to tumble down the remaining stairs and be seriously injured. But she managed to regain her balance and continue the descent, even though her legs were shaking from exertion and her lungs were burning from smoke inhalation. When they finally reached the ground floor and emerged from the building, Danny and several other EMTs immediately surrounded them. Sarah's uniform was covered in soot, her face was streaked with smoke stains, and she was coughing uncontrollably. Mrs. Peterson was conscious but needed immediate treatment for smoke inhalation. "What the hell were you thinking?" Danny shouted as he began examining Mrs. Peterson's condition. "You could have been killed up there. That's not what EMTs are trained to do." Sarah couldn't answer because she was coughing too hard, but she felt a sense of satisfaction that she had managed to get Mrs. Peterson out of the building safely. Around them, the scene was gradually becoming more organized as additional emergency responders arrived and began treating the multiple victims from the initial overdose incident. The fire department arrived just as flames began breaking through the roof of the apartment building. The fire captain immediately ordered everyone to move further away from the structure, and Sarah realized that if she had waited for professional firefighters to arrive, Mrs. Peterson would probably not have survived. As the evening progressed and the various emergencies were brought under control, Sarah learned that 13 people had been affected by what turned out to be a batch of heroin contaminated with a powerful synthetic drug. All of them survived because she and Danny had been able to provide immediate treatment while waiting for backup units to arrive. The building fire had displaced 47 residents, but no one had died because Sarah had helped evacuate the people who couldn't escape on their own. Captain Hayes arrived on the scene just as the last patients were being transported to the hospital. He surveyed the chaos of fire trucks, ambulances, and displaced residents, then walked over to where Sarah was sitting in the back of an ambulance while a paramedic checked her for signs of smoke inhalation. "Martinez, I hear you went into a burning building without backup or proper equipment." "That was incredibly stupid and dangerous," he said, his voice carrying the same lack of enthusiasm she remembered from her first day. Sarah looked up at him, still coughing occasionally from the smoke she had inhaled. "Yes, sir. I know it was against protocol. It was also incredibly brave. Danny tells me you handled the mass casualty situation better than EMTs with 5 years of experience, and Mrs. Peterson is alive because you were willing to take a risk that no one could have expected you to take." Captain Hayes paused and looked around at the scene of controlled chaos that surrounded them. Fire trucks were still spraying water on the building, police officers were interviewing witnesses, and EMTs were finishing their paperwork from the multiple patient transports. "Martinez, I'm going to be honest with you. I assigned you to District 12 because I thought you were just another rookie who needed to learn some humility. I figured a few weeks of dealing with the real world would either make you quit or teach you that this job is harder than you thought." Sarah felt her heart sink as she realized that her suspicions had been correct. The assignment to District 12 hadn't been based on her abilities or her willingness to take on difficult work. It had been designed to break her confidence and prove that she wasn't ready for the demanding work of being an EMT. "But tonight proved me wrong," Captain Hayes continued. "You didn't just survive in District 12, you thrived here. You've handled every situation with professionalism and skill, and tonight you went above and beyond what anyone could have expected. Danny requested that you be assigned as his permanent partner, and I'm approving that request." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and vindication wash over her. She had suspected that her assignment was meant to be a test or punishment, but she had also proven that she could handle whatever challenges were thrown at her. The people of District 12 deserved quality medical care, and she was determined to provide it regardless of the difficult conditions or dangerous situations she might face. Danny walked over as Captain Hayes was finishing his conversation with Sarah. His face was still serious, but there was something different in his expression, a look of respect that hadn't been there when they first met 3 weeks ago. "Kid, what you did tonight was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the stupidest." "Probably both," he said as he sat down next to her. "But you saved lives tonight, and you did it without hesitating when people needed help. That's what this job is really about." As they drove back to the station in the early morning hours, Sarah reflected on everything that had happened during her first month as an EMT. She had been assigned to District 12 as a test designed to reveal her limitations, but instead, it had revealed her strengths. She had found her place in a profession that demanded quick thinking, physical courage, and emotional resilience. The sun was beginning to rise over the city as they cleaned and restocked their ambulance for the next shift. Sarah was exhausted. Her throat was still sore from smoke inhalation, and her uniform would need to be replaced because of the soot and damage from the fire. But she felt more confident and satisfied than she had since becoming an EMT. She had been thrown into the dead zone to see if she would break, but instead she had discovered exactly what she was capable of accomplishing when lives depended on her actions. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new emergencies, but Sarah was ready for whatever District 12 could throw at her. She had found her calling in the city's most neglected area, helping people who needed medical care regardless of their circumstances or the dangers involved in providing that care. 6 months had passed since the night of the fire at Riverside Apartments, and Sarah's reputation throughout the Metropolitan Emergency Services had completely transformed. Word of her actions that night had spread quickly through the department, and what had started as whispered skepticism about the rookie assigned to District 12 had evolved into genuine respect for her skills and dedication. But the real changes went much deeper than department gossip and recognition from her colleagues. District 12 itself was different now, and Sarah was a big part of the reason why. Her consistent presence and professional care had built trust with residents who had previously avoided calling for medical help when they needed it. People who had once viewed EMTs with suspicion now specifically requested Unit 12 when they had emergencies. Children in the neighborhood knew her by name and would wave when they saw the ambulance driving through their streets. Danny had become not just her partner, but also her strongest advocate within the department. Their partnership had evolved from his reluctant acceptance of a rookie he was forced to babysit into a genuine professional relationship built on mutual respect and complementary skills. He still handled the most complex medical situations, but he increasingly relied on Sarah's quick thinking and her ability to connect with patients who were frightened or distrustful of medical authority. "You know, Martinez, when I first heard they were assigning me a rookie partner, I put in for a transfer to another district," Danny admitted one morning as they prepared for their shift. "I figured you'd last maybe 2 weeks before you either quit or got yourself killed trying to prove something." Sarah looked up from the equipment checklist she was completing. Even after 6 months of working together, Danny rarely talked about his initial impressions of her or his expectations when she first arrived at District 12. "What made you change your mind?" she asked. "Remember that call 3 weeks into your assignment? The elderly woman who had fallen and couldn't get back up? And all her family was arguing about whether to take her to the hospital because they couldn't afford it?" Danny checked the expiration dates on their medications as he spoke. "You sat down on that filthy floor and held her hand while you explained every part of the treatment process and what the hospital would and wouldn't charge for. You spent 20 minutes making sure she understood her options instead of just loading her up and driving away." Sarah remembered the call clearly. Mrs. May Rodriguez had been lying on her kitchen floor for hours before her family called 911, and they were terrified that an ambulance ride and emergency room visit would bankrupt them. Sarah had taken the time to explain their financial assistance programs and help them understand what treatment would actually cost. "That's when I realized you weren't just here to prove something to yourself or to impress the other EMTs. You actually cared about these people as individuals, not just as medical cases to solve," Danny continued. "Most EMTs burn out in District 12 because they can't handle the poverty and the social problems that complicate every call. But those things don't bother you. They just make you work harder to help." Their conversation was interrupted by a call that would turn out to be another defining moment in Sarah's career. The dispatcher reported a shooting at the community center on Riverside Avenue, with multiple victims and an active scene that was still potentially dangerous. Police were en route, but the estimated time of arrival was 12 minutes due to other emergencies across the city. As they drove toward the community center, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of adrenaline and focus that came with high-stakes emergency calls. But there was also something else. A sense of confidence and preparedness that had developed through months of handling difficult situations in District 12. She was no longer the nervous rookie who had walked into Captain Hayes's office 6 months ago. "Unit 12, be advised that witnesses report 3 victims down, unknown extent of injuries. No word yet on whether the shooter is still on scene," the dispatcher updated them as they pulled into the parking lot of the community center. The scene was chaotic, but not dangerous. The shooting had apparently been the result of a gang dispute that had moved inside the building, but the shooters had fled immediately afterward. Residents from the surrounding neighborhood had gathered outside the building, some of them crying and others shouting about what they had seen. 3 young men were lying on the ground near the entrance to the building, all of them conscious but bleeding from gunshot wounds. Sarah and Danny immediately began triage to determine which patients needed the most urgent care. The first victim had been shot in the leg and was bleeding heavily, but was conscious and stable. The second had a gunshot wound to his shoulder and was experiencing significant pain, but was not in immediate danger. The third victim was the most serious. He had been shot in the abdomen and was showing signs of internal bleeding that could quickly become life-threatening. "Sarah, take the abdominal wound. I'll handle the other 2 until backup arrives," Danny directed as he began treating the leg wound. "Keep him stable for transport and monitor for signs of shock." As Sarah began working on the most critically injured victim, she realized that a crowd was gathering around them. Unlike the usual curious onlookers who appeared at emergency scenes, this crowd included family members and friends of the victims who were becoming increasingly agitated about the police response time and the circumstances that had led to the shooting. "Why aren't the police here yet? This is exactly the kind of thing that happens in this neighborhood and nobody cares," shouted one woman who appeared to be the mother of one of the victims. "They don't care about us over here. If this happened in the suburbs, there would already be 20 police cars here," added a man whose voice was rising with anger and frustration. Sarah could sense that the crowd's emotions were escalating, and she was concerned that the scene could become unstable before police backup arrived. While she continued treating her patient's wounds and monitoring his vital signs, she also began talking to the people around her in an effort to calm the situation. "I understand you're frustrated and scared. These are serious injuries and everyone wants to see justice done," she said while maintaining her focus on the medical treatment. "But right now, the most important thing is getting these young men to the hospital where they can receive proper surgical care. We need everyone to stay calm so we can do our jobs effectively." One of the younger men in the crowd stepped forward aggressively. "You don't understand anything about what's happening here. This is our neighborhood and our people, and we're tired of being ignored when we need help." Sarah looked up from her patient and made direct eye contact with the angry young man. "You're absolutely right. I don't understand everything about what's happening here, but I do understand that these 3 people need immediate medical care, and I'm not going to let them down. Danny and I have been working in this neighborhood for months, and we respond to every call with the same urgency and professionalism regardless of where it comes from." Something in her voice and her direct acknowledgement of their concerns seemed to calm the crowd slightly. Several people began helping to direct traffic away from the ambulance and clear space for the medical treatment. A woman who had been crying came over and asked if there was anything she could do to help with the medical care. "Actually, yes. Can you help me talk to him and keep him calm while I work on his injuries?" Sarah asked, gesturing toward the most seriously wounded victim. "He needs to stay conscious and alert, but not stressed or agitated." For the next 10 minutes, Sarah worked to stabilize the gunshot victim, while family members and neighbors assisted by providing information about his medical history and helping to keep him calm and responsive. The scene transformed from a potentially volatile crowd situation into a community effort to help the victims survive their injuries. When police and additional EMT units finally arrived, they found a well-organized scene with the victims properly triaged and stabilized for transport. The crowd was still present, but they were calm and cooperative rather than angry and confrontational. Several witnesses voluntarily provided information about the shooting to help with the investigation. Captain Hayes arrived on the scene just as the last victim was being loaded into an ambulance for transport to the hospital. He had been monitoring the radio traffic and had come to assess the situation personally because of concerns about the delayed police response and the potential for crowd control problems. "Martinez, Coleman, what's the status here?" he asked as he surveyed the scene. "All 3 victims stabilized and transported. No additional injuries, scene is secure, and we had excellent cooperation from the community during treatment," Danny reported. Sarah managed the crowd interaction while providing medical care, turned what could have been a difficult situation into a community response. Captain Hayes looked around at the residents who were still gathered near the community center, many of them talking calmly with the police officers who had arrived to investigate the shooting. It was clear that something unusual had happened here. Normally, scenes involving gang violence and delayed police response resulted in hostile crowds and uncooperative witnesses. "Martinez, can I speak with you privately for a moment?" Captain Hayes asked as the other EMTs finished cleaning up their equipment. Sarah followed him to a quiet area away from the crowd and the other emergency responders. She wondered if she had somehow mishandled the situation or violated protocol in her efforts to calm the crowd while treating the victims. "Sarah, I've been watching your work in District 12 for 6 months now, and I have to admit that you've exceeded every expectation I had when I assigned you here," Captain Hayes began. "But what I saw here today was something beyond just good medical skills or professional competence." Sarah waited for him to continue, unsure of where the conversation was headed. "You turned a potentially dangerous crowd control situation into a community response effort. You managed to provide excellent medical care while also de-escalating tensions and building cooperation between residents and emergency responders. That's not something we can teach in EMT school. Captain Hayes paused and looked back toward the community center, where residents were still talking with police officers and helping to provide information about the shooting. I want to offer you a position as a training officer for new EMTs. You would still work primarily in District 12, but you'd also be responsible for mentoring rookie EMTs and teaching them how to handle complex situations like the ones you've mastered here. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and surprise at the unexpected offer. 6 months ago, she had been the rookie who was assigned to District 12 as a test of her abilities. Now she was being asked to help train other new EMTs and share the skills she had developed through months of challenging work. Captain, I appreciate the offer, but I need to ask, would this position take me away from District 12 full-time? Because I feel like this is where I belong, and I don't want to abandon the community we've built relationships with here. Captain Hayes smiled, the first genuinely warm expression Sarah had seen from him since her first day on the job. Martinez, you'll be staying right here in District 12. The plan is to use this district as a training ground for new EMTs, with you and Danny as the primary training team. We've realized that EMTs who can succeed here can handle anything they'll encounter anywhere else in the city. As they drove back to the station that evening, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since the morning 6 months ago when she had walked into the Metropolitan Emergency Services headquarters as a nervous rookie. She had been assigned to District 12 as a test designed to break her confidence and prove her limitations. Instead, she had discovered strengths she didn't know she possessed and had found her true calling in serving a community that desperately needed quality medical care. Danny broke the comfortable silence that had settled between them. You know, Sarah, what you did today with that crowd was something I've never seen before. I've been working in District 12 for 3 years, and I've never seen residents cooperate with emergency responders the way they did today. I think it's because we've been here consistently for months now. They know us, and they trust that we're going to take care of their family members and friends regardless of the circumstances, Sarah replied. It's not about any special skills I have. It's about showing up every day and treating people with dignity and respect. Maybe, but there's something else, too. You don't just see patients when you look at these people. You see individuals with stories and families and problems that go beyond their medical emergencies. That makes all the difference in how you interact with them. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the station early to prepare for her first day as a training officer. A new rookie named Michael Chen was scheduled to begin his assignment in District 12. And Sarah was responsible for helping him understand the unique challenges and opportunities that came with working in the city's most demanding district. Michael was 24 years old and had graduated at the top of his EMT training class, just as Sarah had 6 months earlier. He was eager and confident, but Sarah could see the same nervousness she had felt on her first day when she met Captain Hayes and learned about her assignment. Good morning, Michael. I'm Sarah Martinez, and I'll be your training officer for District 12. Before we head out on calls, I want to tell you a little bit about this district and what you can expect to encounter here, she began, as they walked toward their assigned ambulance. I've heard that District 12 is pretty challenging, Michael replied. Some of the other EMTs told me it's where they send rookies to see if they can handle the real world. Sarah smiled at the familiar story. She remembered the conversations she had overheard during her first weeks on the job, when other EMTs speculated about how long she would last in District 12 before requesting a transfer to a safer district. That's probably true, Michael, but it's also where you can make the biggest difference in people's lives. The patients we treat here deal with problems that go way beyond their immediate medical needs. Poverty, addiction, violence, inadequate housing, and limited access to health care. But that doesn't make them any less deserving of excellent medical care. As they drove through District 12 that morning, Sarah pointed out the locations where she and Danny had responded to significant calls over the past 6 months. She explained the relationships they had built with residents and the trust they had earned through consistent professional care. Most importantly, she helped Michael understand that success in District 12 required more than just medical skills. It required empathy, patience, and a genuine commitment to serving people who had been failed by many other institutions. Their first call of the day was to assist Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly woman who had fallen in her kitchen months earlier during Sarah's 3rd week on the job. When they arrived at her apartment, Mrs. Rodriguez greeted Sarah by name and introduced her to Michael as the EMT who saved my life and helped my family understand the hospital system. As they treated Mrs. Rodriguez's current medical issue, a minor injury from a fall that didn't require hospital transport, Michael watched Sarah interact with the patient and her family. He saw how Sarah took time to explain every aspect of the treatment and made sure the family understood their options for follow-up care. He also noticed how the family trusted Sarah completely and followed her medical advice without question. "Sarah, how did you build such a strong relationship with this family?" Michael asked as they walked back to the ambulance. "Time and consistency," Sarah replied. "Mrs. Rodriguez was one of my first patients in District 12, and I made sure to treat her with the same care and respect I would want for my own grandmother. Her family saw that I genuinely cared about her well-being beyond just the immediate medical emergency. That kind of relationship doesn't happen overnight, but it's what makes this work meaningful." As the months continued, Sarah trained a total of 8 new EMTs in District 12, sharing the lessons she had learned through her own challenging experiences in the neighborhood. Some of them struggled with the complex social situations and requested transfers to other districts. But others, like Michael Chen, thrived in the environment and chose to stay in District 12 as permanent assignments. Captain Hayes eventually created a formal program based on Sarah's training methods, using District 12 as a proving ground for new EMTs who showed exceptional potential. The program became known throughout the department as one of the most demanding but also most rewarding assignments available to emergency medical personnel. Sarah had been thrown into the dead zone to see if she would break under pressure. Instead, she had emerged as a leader who was shaping the next generation of EMTs and transforming the relationship between emergency services and one of the city's most neglected communities. She had not only survived the test that was designed to reveal her limitations, she had exceeded every expectation and created a legacy that would benefit both her profession and the people she served for years to come. On the 1-year anniversary of her first day in District 12, Sarah received a commendation from the mayor's office recognizing her contributions to community health and emergency services. The ceremony took place at the same community center where she had treated gunshot victims and calmed an angry crowd 6 months earlier. This time, the gathering included residents from throughout District 12 who had come to honor the EMT who had changed their neighborhood's relationship with emergency medical care. As Sarah stood before the crowd of colleagues, city officials, and community members, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had started as a rookie who was assigned to District 12 as a test of her abilities and determination. But she had discovered that the real test wasn't whether she could survive in a challenging environment. It was whether she could use her skills and dedication to make that environment better for everyone who lived there. Sarah Martinez had not just emerged unshaken from the dead zone. She had transformed it into a place where excellent emergency medical care was available to everyone, regardless of their circumstances. And in doing so, she had proven that sometimes the people who are expected to break under pressure are actually the ones who are strong enough to build something better from the pieces left behind by others who had given up.